The dust kicked up around Adelaide Grey's worn boots as she stumbled backward from the force of her stepfather's shove, landing hard against the splintered fence outside their ramshackle house on the outskirts of Snake River, Idaho. The year was 1876, and the summer heat pressed down on everything like a heavy hand, making the air shimmer and waver above the parched earth. Her stepfather's face was twisted with contempt as he jabbed a thick finger toward her, his words cutting deeper than any physical blow ever could. "You will never amount to nothing, girl. You hear me? Nothing. Just like your worthless mother before she had the good sense to die and leave me with you." Adelaide's hands trembled as she pushed herself upright, her long auburn hair falling across her face in tangled waves. At 19 years old, she had heard variations of these words her entire life, but they still managed to find the tender places in her heart and twist. She had spent years trying to prove him wrong, working from dawn until long past sunset, tending the vegetable garden, mending clothes, cooking meals, cleaning, all while he drank away what little money they had and gambled the rest. Nothing she did was ever good enough. Nothing she accomplished ever mattered. "I want you gone by tomorrow morning," he continued, swaying slightly on his feet even though it was barely noon. "You eat too much, you cost too much, and you are about as useful as a three-legged mule. Get out of my sight." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. She had learned years ago that tears only made him meaner. Instead, she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked past him into the small house that had never truly felt like a home. She owned almost nothing in this world. A change of clothes, a worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, a silver locket with her mother's picture inside, and a pair of riding gloves her mother had made when Adelaide was just a child. Everything fit into a small canvas bag. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, Adelaide walked down the dusty main street of Snake River with her bag slung over her shoulder and exactly $3.20 in her pocket. The town was small but bustling, situated along the Snake River where traders and ranchers came to do business. False-fronted buildings lined the main thoroughfare, and the sound of a piano drifted from one of the saloons. Adelaide had been to town countless times, but always with a purpose, always with errands to run for her stepfather. Now she walked with no destination, no plan, and for the first time in her life, no one waiting for her return. She found herself standing outside the general store, staring at a notice board covered with various advertisements and announcements. Her eyes scanned desperately for anything that might offer her a path forward. Most of the postings were for ranch hands, requiring skills she did not possess, or for mail order, brides heading to remote mining camps, which filled her with a different kind of dread. Then her eyes landed on a small handwritten note near the bottom of the board. "Cook and housekeeper needed, room and board provided. Inquire at the Hartley Ranch, 5 miles north of town." Adelaide's heart hammered in her chest. She could cook, she could clean, and she desperately needed a place to sleep tonight. The Hartley name was familiar to her, though she had never met any of the family personally. They owned one of the larger cattle operations in the area, and from what she had heard, they were decent people. It was worth a try. It had to be worth a try because she had no other options. The walk to the Hartley Ranch took her nearly 2 hours in the oppressive heat. By the time she turned down the long drive leading to the main house, the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and her throat was parched. The ranch spread out before her like something from a dream, with well-maintained fences, a large barn, several outbuildings, and a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch wrapped around the front. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could see several men working near the barn, their voices carrying across the evening air. Adelaide approached the house slowly, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after her long walk. She climbed the porch steps and knocked on the heavy wooden door, her heart in her throat. A moment later, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair, pulled back in a neat bun, and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Can I help you, dear?" the woman asked, her voice warm but curious. "I saw a notice in town about a position for a cook and housekeeper," Adelaide said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know it is late in the day to be calling, but I wanted to inquire if the position is still available." The woman studied her for a long moment, and Adelaide felt certain she would be turned away. Then the woman smiled and opened the door wider. "Come in, child. You look like you have walked a fair distance. My name is Margaret Hartley. My son runs this ranch now, and yes, we are still looking for help. Our previous cook left to get married 3 weeks ago, and I'm afraid my cooking skills are somewhat limited." Relief flooded through Adelaide so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you, madam. My name is Adelaide Grey." Margaret led her through a spacious entryway into a comfortable kitchen with a large cast-iron stove, a sturdy wooden table, and windows that let in the fading evening light. "Sit down, Adelaide. Let me get you some water and something to eat, and then you can tell me about yourself." As Adelaide sat at the table and gratefully accepted a glass of cool water and a plate of bread and cheese, Margaret settled into the chair across from her. "Now then, tell me about your experience. Have you worked as a cook before?" Adelaide chose her words carefully. "I have been managing a household for many years, madam. Cooking, cleaning, mending, gardening. I worked for my stepfather, but he has decided he no longer needs my help." That was the kindest way she could phrase her situation without revealing the full ugly truth of it. Margaret's eyes sharpened with understanding, and Adelaide suspected the older woman could read between the lines of what she had said. "I see. And do you have references I could contact?" Adelaide's heart sank. "No, madam, I am afraid I do not." Before Margaret could respond, the front door opened and heavy footsteps crossed the entryway. A moment later, a man appeared in the kitchen doorway, and Adelaide felt her breath catch in her throat. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who worked hard every day. Dark hair fell across his forehead, slightly damp with sweat, and his eyes were an extraordinary shade of blue-green that seemed to shift in the lamplight. Dust covered his clothes, and he looked tired, but there was a strength in his bearing that was impossible to ignore. "Mother, I told you to wait until I could ride into town tomorrow to interview candidates," he said, pulling off his hat and running a hand through his hair. Then his eyes landed on Adelaide, and whatever else he had been about to say seemed to die on his lips. "This is Adelaide Grey," Margaret said, rising from her seat. She walked all the way from town to inquire about the position. "Adelaide, this is my son, Daniel Hartley." Adelaide stood quickly, almost knocking over her chair in her haste. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Hartley. I did not realize I should have waited for a formal interview process." Daniel's eyes never left her face, and Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. He seemed to be studying her with an intensity that made her nervous, as though he could see past all her carefully constructed walls right down to the frightened girl beneath. "No apology necessary," he said finally, his voice deep and warm. "You walked 5 miles in this heat?" "Yes, sir. I saw the notice this afternoon." He frowned slightly. "Do you have family in Snake River, Miss Grey?" The question felt loaded, dangerous. Adelaide lifted her chin slightly. "No, sir, not anymore." Something flickered across Daniel's face, an understanding that made Adelaide's chest tighten. He turned to his mother. "Have you discussed the position with Miss Grey?" "We were just getting to that when you came in," Margaret said. "But I think Adelaide would be perfect for what we need. The question is whether she thinks the position would suit her." Daniel pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for Adelaide to do the same. "The job is straightforward, Miss Grey. We need someone to cook 3 meals a day for myself, my mother, and usually 4 to 6 ranch hands depending on the season. We also need help maintaining the house, though my mother still handles most of the household management. You would have your own room on the 2nd floor, and in addition to room and board, we pay $15 a month. Sundays are half days, with only breakfast and supper required. Does that sound acceptable?" $15 a month. Room and board. It was more than Adelaide had dared to hope for. "That sounds more than acceptable, Mr. Hartley. When would you need me to start?" "Can you cook breakfast tomorrow morning?" he asked, and there was the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, sir, I can." "Then the job is yours, Miss Grey. My mother will show you to your room." As Margaret led Adelaide up the stairs to a small but clean room with a real bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the ranch, Adelaide felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to identify it as hope. She set her bag down on the bed and ran her hand over the quilt, marveling at the softness of it. "There are fresh linens in the dresser," Margaret said from the doorway, "and a wash basin and pitcher on the stand. Breakfast is usually at 6, which gives the men time to eat before heading out to work. I will show you the kitchen layout tonight so you can find everything in the morning. Thank you, Mrs. Hartley. You have been incredibly kind. Margaret smiled. We are glad to have you here, Adelaide. I have a good feeling about this. That night, lying in the first real bed she had slept in for as long as she could remember, Adelaide stared up at the ceiling and let herself cry. But these tears were different from all the ones that had come before. These tears were a release, a washing away of the old life to make room for whatever came next. And as she finally drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking about the way Daniel Hartley had looked at her, as though she was someone worth seeing. Adelaide woke before dawn the next morning, years of early rising making it impossible to sleep past first light. She dressed quickly in her spare dress, which was only marginally cleaner than the one she had worn yesterday, and made her way downstairs to the kitchen. In the quiet pre-dawn darkness, she lit the lamps and stoked the fire in the stove, then began taking inventory of what was available. The pantry was well stocked with flour, cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, coffee, and various preserves. A covered basket on the counter held fresh eggs, and she found butter and milk in the cold cellar. By the time the sky began to lighten, Adelaide had biscuits in the oven, coffee brewing, eggs frying, and salt pork sizzling in a cast-iron skillet. She had also made gravy and set the table for 8, assuming the ranch hands would eat with the family. She was just pulling the biscuits out of the oven when Margaret appeared in the doorway, fully dressed with her hair neatly arranged. "Oh my," Margaret said, looking around the kitchen with wide eyes. "Adelaide, this is wonderful, and it smells absolutely delicious." "I hope I made enough," Adelaide said, suddenly worried she had overestimated. "I am certain you have." Margaret moved to help her carry the food to the table, just as heavy footsteps sounded on the porch. The door opened, and Daniel entered with 5 other men, all of them dusty and clearly already having done some early morning work. They filed into the kitchen, pulling off their hats and hanging them on pegs by the door. Daniel's eyes found Adelaide immediately, and something warm passed between them before he turned to the other men. "Boys, this is Miss Adelaide Grey, our new cook. I expect you all to mind your manners and show proper respect." A chorus of "Yes, sir," and "Nice to meet you, madam," followed, and Adelaide felt her face flush as she gestured to the table. "Please, sit down. Everything is ready." The meal passed in a blur of compliments and requests to pass various dishes. The men ate with the enthusiasm of people who had been making do with inadequate cooking for too long, and Adelaide felt a small glow of pride with each appreciative comment. Daniel said little during the meal, but she noticed him watching her when he thought she was not looking, his expression thoughtful. After the men had headed out to begin their day's work and Margaret had retired to her sitting room to work on some mending, Adelaide cleaned up the breakfast dishes and began preparations for the midday meal. She was peeling potatoes when Daniel came back into the kitchen, a concerned expression on his face. "Miss Grey, do you have appropriate work clothes? I noticed your dress is quite worn." Adelaide's hands stilled on the potatoes she was holding, embarrassment flooding through her. "This is what I have, Mr. Hartley, but I can mend it and make it last." Daniel frowned, and Adelaide braced herself for criticism. Instead, he said, "There is a seamstress in town, Mrs. Chen, who does excellent work. I would like you to go into town this morning and have her make you 3 work dresses and whatever else you need. Tell her to put it on the ranch account." Adelaide's eyes widened. "Mr. Hartley, that is too generous. I cannot accept." "It is not generosity, Miss Grey. It is practical necessity. You cannot work effectively in clothes that are falling apart." His voice softened slightly. "Please, consider it part of your employment benefits." Adelaide bit her lip, torn between pride and the very real need for clothing that was not held together with careful stitches and prayers. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I appreciate your kindness." "Daniel," he said suddenly, "when it is just the family and the hands, you can call me Daniel." "Then you should call me Adelaide," she replied before she could think better of it. The smile that broke across his face transformed him, erasing the serious, hard-working rancher and revealing someone younger, more open. "Adelaide it is. I will have one of the hands hitch up the wagon for you. It is too hot to walk to town again." As Adelaide rode into town in the wagon, the morning sun already promising another scorching day, she marveled at how drastically her circumstances had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday she had been homeless and hopeless. Today she had a job, a roof over her head, and an employer who seemed to genuinely care about her well-being. She tried not to think too much about the way her heart had fluttered when Daniel smiled at her, or the way his eyes seemed to see past all her defenses. That way lay complications she could not afford. Mrs. Chen's shop was located on a quiet side street, marked by a simple sign in both English and Chinese characters. Adelaide entered to find a small woman with graying hair and nimble fingers working on a complicated piece of embroidery. She looked up as Adelaide entered, her weathered face creasing into a smile. "Hello, dear. How can I help you today?" Adelaide explained her situation, and Mrs. Chen listened attentively before leading her to a selection of sturdy fabrics suitable for work dresses. They chose 3 different materials in practical colors, and Mrs. Chen took Adelaide's measurements with efficient precision, making notes in a small book as she worked. "You work for Daniel Hartley now, Mrs.?" Ao Chen asked as she measured Adelaide's waist. "He is a good man. His father was my husband's friend before they both passed. Daniel helped my family when we faced some difficulties with other townspeople who did not want Chinese living here. He stood up for us when it would have been easier to look away." Adelaide felt her respect for Daniel grow. "He seems very fair." "More than fair, kind." Mrs. Chen finished her measurements and smiled. "I will have 2 of the dresses ready by next week and the 3rd the week after. Come back any time if you need adjustments." Adelaide thanked her and left the shop, but instead of heading straight back to the ranch, she found herself wandering toward the general store. She had not forgotten her stepfather's house on the edge of town, and part of her worried she might run into him. But another part of her, a braver part that was just beginning to emerge, wanted to prove to herself that she was not afraid anymore. She was standing outside the general store, gathering her courage to go inside, when a familiar and unwelcome voice cut through the morning air. "Well, well, if it is not my worthless stepdaughter." Adelaide turned to find her stepfather lurching toward her, his face already flushed with drink despite the early hour. Her stomach clenched with old fear, but she forced herself to stand straight and meet his bleary gaze. "I have nothing to say to you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You think you are better than me now?" he snarled, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You think you can just walk away?" "You told me to leave," Adelaide reminded him, taking a step back. "I did what you asked." He reached out to grab her arm, his fingers like claws, and Adelaide felt a surge of real fear. But before his hand could make contact, another hand shot out and caught his wrist in an iron grip. "I suggest you step away from the lady." Adelaide's heart leaped as Daniel appeared beside her, his face hard as granite. He was still holding her stepfather's wrist, and from the expression on the older man's face, Daniel's grip was painfully tight. "This does not concern you," her stepfather growled, trying unsuccessfully to pull his arm free. "When someone threatens a woman on a public street, it concerns everyone." Daniel's voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel that Adelaide had not heard before. "Especially when that woman works for me. Now, I am going to let go of your wrist, and you are going to walk away. If I ever see you bothering Miss Grey again, we are going to have a much more serious conversation. Do we understand each other?" For a moment, Adelaide thought her stepfather might argue, but something in Daniel's expression must have convinced him otherwise. He jerked his arm free when Daniel released him and stumbled backward, his face twisted with impotent rage. "She's not worth the trouble anyway," he spat before turning and staggering away down the street. Adelaide found herself trembling, the confrontation leaving her shaken, even though it had ended without violence. Daniel's hand came to rest gently on her elbow, steadying her. "Are you all right?" His voice was soft now, concerned. "Yes. Thank you. I am sorry you had to see that." "You have nothing to apologize for." Daniel guided her toward the wagon, which was parked nearby. "Was that man your stepfather?" Adelaide nodded, not trusting her voice. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, "Did he hurt you? Before you came to the ranch, I mean." The question was careful, giving her room to answer or not. Adelaide appreciated that more than he could know. "Not physically, but words can cut just as deep." "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "They can." He helped her up into the wagon seat with a gentleness that made her throat tighten. "You never have to worry about him again, Adelaide. You have a place at the Hartley Ranch for as long as you want it." As they rode back toward the ranch, Adelaide studied Daniel's profile in the bright morning sunlight. His jaw was still tight with anger over the confrontation, and his hands gripped the reins with more force than necessary. She realized with a start that he was still upset on her behalf, still protective, even though the danger had passed. "Why did you come into town?" she asked, suddenly curious. "I thought you had work at the ranch." I do." He glanced at her, then back at the road. "But I realized after you left that I should have gone with you. It is not appropriate for you to be in town alone, and I should have thought of that before sending you off." "I am perfectly capable of managing on my own," Adelaide said, though she was secretly touched by his concern. "I know you are, but that does not mean you should have to." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then added, "My father taught me that strength is not about being able to handle everything alone. Real strength is knowing when to accept help and when to offer it." Adelaide turned his words over in her mind, finding truth in them that challenged everything her stepfather had ever told her. Her stepfather had always equated independence with isolation, had always made her feel weak for needing anything from anyone. But Daniel was suggesting something different, a kind of strength built on connection rather than solitude. The rest of the ride passed in comfortable silence, and when they arrived back at the ranch, Daniel helped her down from the wagon with a smile. "Thank you for handling that situation with such grace. Not everyone could have stayed so composed." "I have had a lot of practice keeping my composure," Adelaide said, and immediately wished she had not. It revealed too much, opened doors she was not ready to walk through. But Daniel simply nodded, understanding in his eyes, and said, "Well, you do not have to practice it here. At the Hartley Ranch you can be whoever you truly are." Those words stayed with Adelaide through the rest of the day as she prepared the midday meal, served it to the hungry ranch hands, cleaned up afterward, and then started preparations for supper. She found herself thinking about who she truly was beneath all the armor she had built up over the years. Did she even know anymore? Her stepfather had spent so long telling her she was worthless that she had almost started to believe it. But here, in this place, people treated her with respect. They thanked her for her cooking, they asked her opinion on things, they smiled at her like they were genuinely happy she was there. And Daniel, he looked at her like she mattered, like she was someone worth protecting, worth caring about. Over the following weeks, Adelaide settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent her mornings cooking and cleaning, her afternoons preparing the evening meal and doing laundry or mending, and her evenings quietly reading in her room or sitting on the porch with Margaret as the older woman told stories about the ranch's history. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time in her life, Adelaide felt the weight of constant criticism lifting from her shoulders. The ranch hands were respectful and appreciative, always ready with a compliment about her cooking or an offer to help with heavy tasks. Margaret became something like the mother Adelaide had lost years ago, offering gentle guidance and companionship without judgment. And Daniel was becoming something Adelaide did not have words for yet, something that made her heart race when he entered a room, something that made her look forward to meals just so she could watch him across the table, something dangerous and wonderful all at once. She noticed that he found reasons to come to the kitchen more often than strictly necessary. He would offer to help carry water from the well, or he would ask her opinion on what vegetables to plant in the garden, or he would simply sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and talk to her while she worked. Their conversations ranged from the mundane to the profound, and Adelaide found herself sharing things with him that she had never told another living soul. One evening in late August, nearly 2 months after Adelaide had arrived at the ranch, she was sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. The heat of the day was finally breaking, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and grass. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Daniel approaching with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, offering her one of the glasses. "Please do." Adelaide accepted the lemonade gratefully and moved over to make room for him on the swing. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently as it moved back and forth. Adelaide was acutely aware of Daniel's proximity, of the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling evening air. Finally, he spoke. "Adelaide, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What did your stepfather mean when he said you would never amount to anything?" Adelaide felt her chest tighten. She had hoped Daniel had forgotten that particular detail from their confrontation in town. But, of course, he had not. Daniel forgot nothing. She took a sip of her lemonade, buying time to formulate an answer. "He said that to me frequently," she admitted quietly. "He believed I was fundamentally worthless, incapable of doing anything of value, And after hearing it for so many years, I started to believe it too. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and when Adelaide finally dared to glance at him, his expression was fierce. He was wrong, you know that, right? Everything he said was a lie. I am starting to understand that, Adelaide said. Being here, working for you and your mother, it has helped me see things differently. You are one of the most capable people I have ever met, Daniel said, his voice intense. The way you manage the household, the way you handle challenges, the way you treat everyone with kindness, even after the way you were treated, it is remarkable. You are remarkable. Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back quickly. Thank you, Daniel. That means more to me than you know. Daniel shifted slightly, turning to face her more fully. In the fading light, his eyes were the color of a mountain lake, deep and clear. Adelaide, I need to be honest with you about something. Her heart began to hammer in her chest. What is it? These past 2 months, getting to know you, seeing you every day, I have developed feelings for you that go beyond employer and employee, beyond friendship even. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. I care about you, Adelaide, deeply. And I hope, that you might feel something similar. Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. She did feel something similar. She felt like her whole world tilted on its axis whenever Daniel was near. She felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in her life. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was worth something after all. But fear held her tongue. What if she was misreading everything? What if this was just kindness, and she was making it into something more because she was so desperate to be loved? Daniel seemed to sense her hesitation. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused from work, and Adelaide felt that simple touch all the way down to her bones. You do not have to say anything right now, Daniel continued. I just needed you to know how I feel, and I want you to know something else, something important. He squeezed her hand gently. Your stepfather said you would never amount to anything, but Adelaide, you already mean everything to me right now today. Not someday in the future if you accomplish some arbitrary goal. Not if you change or improve or become something different. Right now, exactly as you are, you mean everything to me. The tears Adelaide had been fighting spilled over and ran down her cheeks. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever valued her simply for existing, simply for being herself. Daniel released her hand and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb, his touch incredibly tender. I did not mean to make you cry, he said softly. These are good tears, Adelaide managed. Happy tears, because I feel the same way, Daniel. I have been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I feel the same way. The smile that spread across Daniel's face was brilliant, transforming his entire expression. You do? I do. Adelaide laughed through her tears. I have never felt this way about anyone before. You make me feel safe and valued, and like maybe I am not the worthless person I was always told I was. You are not, Daniel said firmly. You are extraordinary, Adelaide Grey. And if you will let me, I would like to spend every day proving that to you. Adelaide nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Daniel leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and sweet, but it sent warmth flooding through Adelaide's entire body. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, marveling at the feel of his stubble jaw against her palms. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing me. I will always see you, Daniel promised, for exactly who you are. They sat on that porch swing long into the night, talking about everything and nothing, holding hands and stealing glances at each other, like teenagers experiencing first love. In many ways, Adelaide supposed, this was first love. Her first real love. The first time someone had chosen her and valued her and made her feel like she was enough exactly as she was. When Adelaide finally made her way up to her room, she felt like she was floating. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, but sleep was impossible. Her mind kept replaying Daniel's words, the way he had looked at her, the gentle pressure of his lips against her forehead. She pressed her fingers to the spot he had kissed, still able to feel the warmth of it. The next morning at breakfast, Adelaide was hyper-aware of Daniel's presence. Every time their eyes met across the table, she felt a flutter in her stomach. The ranch hands seemed to sense that something had shifted, exchanging knowing glances and barely suppressed grins. Margaret caught Adelaide's eye at one point and gave her a warm, approving smile that made Adelaide blush furiously. After the meal, as Adelaide was clearing dishes, Daniel came up beside her and spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Would you like to go riding with me this afternoon? I want to show you some of my favorite places on the ranch." "I would love that," Adelaide said, her heart soaring. "But I should warn you, I am not an experienced rider." "That is fine. We will take it slow." Daniel's hand brushed against hers as he reached for a dish, the contact brief but electric. "Meet me at the barn at 2 o'clock. Adelaide nodded, already counting down the hours. The morning passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Adelaide finished her kitchen duties with unusual speed, then went upstairs to change into her riding skirt, one of the garments Mrs. Chen had made for her. She brushed out her long hair and braided it, then pinned the braid up in a coronet around her head to keep it out of the way. Looking at herself in the small mirror above her dresser, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. There was color in her cheeks, a brightness in her eyes, and something else, something that looked almost like happiness. At 2 o'clock precisely, Adelaide made her way to the barn where Daniel was waiting, with 2 horses already saddled. One was a tall bay gelding that Adelaide recognized as Daniel's usual mount. The other was a smaller chestnut mare with a gentle eye and a white star on her forehead. "This is Rosie," Daniel said, stroking the mare's neck. "She is the gentlest horse we have, perfect for someone still learning to ride." Daniel helped Adelaide mount, his hand steadying her as she settled into the saddle. Once she was secure, he swung up onto his own horse with practiced ease, and they set off at a walk toward the open rangeland beyond the barn. The afternoon was warm, but not unbearably hot, with a steady breeze that kept them comfortable as they rode. Daniel kept his horse close to Adelaide's, ready to help if she needed it, but Rosie proved as docile as promised, responding smoothly to Adelaide's uncertain cues. As they rode, Daniel pointed out various features of the ranch, telling her stories about the land and the cattle and the challenges of running such a large operation. After about 30 minutes, they crested a small rise, and Adelaide gasped at the view spread out before them. A small valley nestled between rolling hills, and at its center was a pond fed by a natural spring. Cottonwood trees grew along the water's edge, their leaves shimmering silver green in the breeze. Wildflowers dotted the grass around the pond in splashes of purple and yellow. "It is beautiful," Adelaide breathed. "This is my favorite spot on the entire ranch," Daniel said, dismounting and coming to help Adelaide down. "I used to come here with my father when I was young. After he died, I would come here to think." They left the horses to graze and walked down to the edge of the pond. Adelaide knelt and trailed her fingers in the cool water, watching the ripples spread outward. Daniel sat down on the grass beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Thank you for bringing me here," Adelaide said. "I can see why it is special to you." "I wanted to share it with you," Daniel replied. "I want to share everything with you, Adelaide." Adelaide turned to look at him, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Daniel, I need to ask you something." "Anything." "Are you certain about this? About us? You could have any woman you wanted, someone with a better background, better prospects, someone who was not, well, me." Daniel reached out and took both of her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. "Adelaide, listen to me carefully. I do not want any other woman. I want you. I want your strength and your kindness and the way you see the world. I want your laugh and your smile and the way you hum while you cook. I want every part of you, including the parts you think are broken or damaged. Those parts make you who you are, and I love who you are." "But we have only known each other for 2 months. Adelaide protested weakly. "My parents knew each other for 2 weeks before they decided to marry," Daniel said. "My father used to say that when you know, you know. Time does not matter as much as what you feel. And Adelaide, I know what I feel for you is real and lasting." Adelaide felt her resistance crumbling. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the life he was offering. But years of being told she was worthless had left scars that were hard to ignore. "What if I disappoint you?" "You won't," Daniel said with absolute certainty. "And even if you did, even if you made 1,000 mistakes, it would not change how I feel about you. Love is not about perfection, Adelaide. It is about choosing someone and standing by them through everything." "Love," Adelaide repeated softly, testing the word. Yes, love. Daniel lifted one of her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. I love you, Adelaide Grey. I think I have loved you since the first moment you walked into our kitchen, looking fierce and frightened and absolutely determined to survive. Adelaide felt something break open inside her, some final wall she had been holding up against the world. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling through them. I love you too, Daniel Hartley. I was just too scared to admit it. Daniel pulled her into his arms, and Adelaide went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and letting herself be held. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear, and his arms around her felt like safety, like home, like everything she had ever wanted but never dared to hope for. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms beside the peaceful pond. Eventually, Daniel pulled back just enough to cup Adelaide's face in his hands and look into her eyes. May I kiss you properly this time? Adelaide nodded, her heart racing. Daniel leaned in slowly and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Adelaide had never been kissed before, but she responded instinctively, her hands coming up to rest on Daniel's shoulders. The kiss deepened slightly, and Adelaide felt like fireworks were going off in her chest, like every nerve ending in her body had suddenly come alive. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. Adelaide Grey, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Adelaide's eyes flew open in shock. Are you proposing to me right now? I am, Daniel said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I know it is fast, and I know we have not been courting long, but I do not see the point in waiting when I know exactly what I want. I want you, Adelaide. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. I want everything, and I want it with you. Adelaide thought about how far she had come in just 2 months. She had arrived at the Hartley Ranch broken and convinced of her own worthlessness, but Daniel had shown her a different truth. He had shown her that she was capable and valuable and lovable exactly as she was. He had given her a safe place to heal and grow and discover who she really was beneath all the damage. And more than that, she loved him. She loved his strength and his kindness and the way he treated everyone with respect. She loved his dedication to the ranch and his devotion to his mother. She loved the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Yes, Adelaide said, her voice strong and clear despite the tears still streaming down her face. Yes, Daniel, I will marry you. The joy that lit up Daniel's face was worth every hardship Adelaide had ever endured. He kissed her again, deeper this time, pulling her close and holding her like he never wanted to let go. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Adelaide felt like her heart might burst from sheer happiness. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, their horses walking side by side. Adelaide could not stop smiling, could not stop stealing glances at Daniel and marveling that this was real, that this was her life now. When they reached the barn, Daniel helped her dismount and then caught her hand before she could head toward the house. Wait, he said. I want to tell my mother together. They found Margaret in the sitting room, working on her embroidery. She looked up as they entered, and her eyes immediately went from Adelaide's face to Daniel's and back again. A knowing smile spread across her features. Well, she said, setting down her embroidery, I suspect you two have some news to share. How did you know? Daniel asked, laughing. I am your mother. I always know. Margaret stood and came to embrace first Daniel and then Adelaide. I am so happy for both of you. Adelaide, I could not have chosen a better woman for my son if I had searched the entire country. Adelaide felt tears threatening again. Thank you, Mrs. Hartley. That means the world to me. Please, call me Margaret. After all, you are going to be family now. The engagement period was short. Daniel saw no reason to wait, and Adelaide agreed. They set the wedding date for late September, giving them just over a month to prepare. Margaret threw herself into the planning with enthusiasm, enlisting the help of several women from town to prepare for a reception at the ranch. Adelaide found herself caught up in a whirlwind of activity. Between her regular duties cooking for the household, she had fittings for her wedding dress with Mrs. Chen, who created a beautiful gown in cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She helped Margaret clean and prepare the house for guests. And through it all, she spent every spare moment with Daniel, learning more about the man she was going to marry. One evening, about 2 weeks before the wedding, Adelaide and Daniel were walking along the fence line near the house, watching the last light fade from the sky. Daniel had his arm around Adelaide's waist, and she was leaning into his side, feeling content and peaceful. "Are you nervous about the wedding?" Daniel asked. "A little," Adelaide admitted. "Not about marrying you. About that I am completely certain. But about standing up in front of all those people, having everyone looking at me, I am not used to being the center of attention." "You do not have to be nervous," Daniel said, squeezing her gently. "Everyone who is coming loves us and wants to celebrate with us. And if it helps, you can just focus on me. Look at me the whole time and pretend everyone else is not there." Adelaide smiled. "That does help, actually." They walked in silence for a few moments. Then Daniel said, "Adelaide, I have been thinking about something, and I want your honest opinion." "Of course. After we are married, I do not expect you to continue working as the household cook. I want you to be my wife, my partner in running this ranch. We can hire someone else to do the cooking." Adelaide considered this carefully. "I appreciate that, Daniel, but I enjoy cooking. It makes me feel useful and gives me purpose. Could I continue doing it, at least for now? Maybe once we have children, I will feel differently, but right now, it matters to me." Daniel smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Then you should absolutely continue. I just did not want you to feel obligated." "I do not feel obligated. I feel valued." Adelaide stopped walking and turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You have given me so much, Daniel. A home, security, love. Let me contribute in the ways I can." "You contribute just by being here," Daniel said. "But I understand what you mean, and honestly, the men would revolt if we replaced your cooking with anyone else's." They both laughed, and Adelaide felt a surge of pure happiness. This was her life now, this good, kind man who valued her and respected her opinions. This ranch that had become her home, this family that had embraced her without reservation. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, with a crispness in the air that promised autumn was on its way. Adelaide woke early, too excited and nervous to sleep. Margaret came to her room to help her dress, and as the older woman fastened the buttons on the back of Adelaide's gown, she caught Adelaide's eye in the mirror. "You look absolutely beautiful, dear. Daniel is going to be speechless when he sees you." Adelaide studied her reflection, hardly recognizing herself. The cream silk brought out the warmth in her skin, and Mrs. Chen had styled the dress to fit Adelaide's figure perfectly. Her auburn hair was arranged in soft curls pinned up with small white flowers, and she wore the silver locket that had belonged to her mother. "I wish my mother could be here," Adelaide said softly. Margaret squeezed her shoulders gently. "I am sure she is here in spirit. And Adelaide, I want you to know that I am honored to stand in as your mother today, if you will allow me that privilege." Adelaide turned and embraced Margaret, holding on tight. "Thank you for everything. You have been so kind to me from the very beginning. You are easy to be kind to, my dear. Now, let us get you married." The ceremony was held in the front yard of the ranch house, beneath the wide branches of an old oak tree that Daniel's grandfather had planted when he first claimed the land. Chairs had been set up in neat rows, and nearly 50 people had gathered to witness the wedding. Adelaide recognized some faces from town, including Mrs. Chen beaming proudly in the front row, as well as all the ranch hands dressed in their Sunday best. But as soon as Adelaide saw Daniel standing beneath the oak tree in a dark suit with a white shirt, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him, everyone else faded away. She walked toward him slowly, trying to remember to breathe, and when she reached his side and he took her hands in his, she saw tears shining in his eyes. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he whispered. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Adelaide heard the minister speaking, heard herself repeat vows that promised to love and honor Daniel for the rest of her life, felt Daniel slide a simple gold band onto her finger, and then the minister was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Daniel was pulling her close and kissing her thoroughly while their guests cheered and applauded. The reception that followed was lively and joyful. Tables laden with food were set up near the house, and someone had brought a fiddle and was playing lively dance tunes. Adelaide found herself swept from one conversation to another, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who just months ago had been strangers. But the best moment came later in the evening, when Daniel pulled her away from the crowd and led her behind the barn, where they could have a moment of privacy. "Hello, Mrs. Hartley," he said, his eyes dancing with happiness. "Hello, Mr. Hartley," Adelaide replied, still marveling at the fact that she was someone's wife now. "Daniel's wife? Are you happy?" Daniel asked, suddenly serious. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Adelaide said honestly. "Daniel, 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I was worthless and had nothing to offer the world. But you showed me that none of that was true. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw value in me when I could not see it in myself. You loved me when I did not know how to love myself." Daniel cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "Adelaide, you have to understand something. I did not give you value. You already had it. I just had the privilege of recognizing it. Everything you have become, everything you are, that was already inside you. You just needed a safe place to let it emerge." Adelaide kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. All her gratitude, all her love, all her hope for their future together. When they finally broke apart, Daniel rested his forehead against hers and took a deep breath. "I cannot wait to spend the rest of my life with you," he said. "The rest of our lives starts now," Adelaide replied. They rejoined the party and stayed until the last guest had departed and the sun had long since set. That night, Adelaide and Daniel went to the room they would now share, and Adelaide felt nervous and excited and overwhelmed all at once. But Daniel was patient and gentle, and by the time they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, Adelaide felt complete in a way she never had before. The weeks and months that followed their wedding were the happiest of Adelaide's life. She fell into the rhythm of married life with ease, discovering that she and Daniel complemented each other perfectly. He consulted her on ranch decisions, valuing her opinions and insights. She continued to run the household, but now with Margaret's help rather than as an employee. They worked together, laughed together, and at night they would lie in bed talking about their dreams for the future. Winter came to Idaho, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Adelaide stood at the kitchen window one morning in late November, watching snowflakes drift down from a leaden sky, when a wave of nausea hit her so suddenly she had to grip the counter for support. Margaret, who was sitting at the table mending one of Daniel's shirts, looked up with concern. "Adelaide, are you all right?" "I think so," Adelaide managed. "I just felt a bit dizzy for a moment." Margaret set down her mending and came to Adelaide's side, studying her face carefully. "My dear, when was your last monthly course?" Adelaide frowned, thinking back. With a start, she realized it had been more than 2 months since her last one. She had been so busy, so caught up in her new life, that she had not even noticed. Her eyes widened as the implications hit her. "I think I might be with child," she whispered. Margaret's face broke into a radiant smile. "Oh, Adelaide, how wonderful. Have you told Daniel yet?" "I only just realized myself." Adelaide pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, marveling at the possibility of a life growing inside her, a child, hers and Daniel's. "I want to be certain before I say anything to him." But Daniel noticed the change in her almost immediately. That evening at supper, he caught her hand as she was serving the meal and looked at her with concern. "Adelaide, you have barely touched your food. Are you feeling well?" Adelaide glanced at Margaret, who gave her an encouraging nod. The ranch hands had already finished eating and departed, so it was just the 3 of them. Adelaide took a deep breath and said, "Daniel, I think I might be pregnant." Daniel's fork clattered to his plate, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then a smile spread across his face that rivaled the sun. "Truly? We are going to have a baby." "I believe so. I should see the doctor to be certain, but all the signs are there." Daniel stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over, and he pulled Adelaide into his arms, holding her tight. "This is the best news I have ever received. Well, the second best. The first was when you agreed to marry me." Adelaide laughed, feeling some of her nervousness ease. "You are not worried." "Worried? Adelaide, I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled." Daniel pulled back enough to look at her face, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "We are going to be parents." The next day, Daniel took Adelaide into town to see Dr. Morrison, an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands. After a thorough examination, he confirmed what Adelaide already knew in her heart. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hartley. I would estimate you were about 2.5 months along, which means you should deliver sometime in late May or early June. On the ride back to the ranch, Adelaide could not stop smiling. She was going to be a mother. She was going to have a child with the man she loved, and that child would grow up knowing they were wanted and valued and cherished. Everything her stepfather had said about her, never amounting to anything, had been proven wrong. She had a husband who loved her, a home where she belonged, and now a child on the way. She had everything. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Adelaide experienced morning sickness for the first few months, but Margaret was there with ginger tea and saltine crackers, offering advice from her own experience. Daniel became even more protective and attentive, constantly asking if Adelaide needed anything, if she was comfortable, if she was resting enough. By the time spring arrived and Adelaide's belly had swelled noticeably with the growing child, she felt like she had found her place in the world. She would stand sometimes at the kitchen window, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, and marvel at the journey that had brought her here. Just a year ago, she had been homeless and hopeless, convinced she would never be anything more than a burden. Now, she was Adelaide Hartley, wife and soon-to-be mother, valued member of a family and a community. One warm evening in early May, Adelaide and Daniel were sitting on the porch swing, as they often did, watching the sunset. Adelaide was starting to feel the weight of pregnancy more acutely now, tired more easily and uncomfortable in ways she had not anticipated. But sitting here with Daniel, his arm around her shoulders and his hand resting protectively on her belly, she felt at peace. "Have you thought about names?" Daniel asked. "I have," Adelaide admitted. "If it is a girl, I would like to name her Rose Margaret, after the gentle mare you taught me to ride on, and your mother. If it is a boy, I thought perhaps James, after your father." Daniel's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Those are perfect names. My father would have loved you, Adelaide. He would have been so proud to have you as a daughter. I wish I could have met him. He would have seen in you exactly what I see: strength, kindness, determination, grace. All the things that make you extraordinary." Adelaide leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder. "I still cannot believe this is my life sometimes, that I have you, and your mother, and this ranch, and now a baby on the way. It feels almost too good to be true." "It is true, and you deserve every bit of it," Daniel said firmly. "Adelaide, do you remember what your stepfather said, that you would never amount to anything?" "I remember. He was wrong about so much, but he was especially wrong about that. You have not just amounted to something, you have become everything. Everything to me, everything to my mother, everything to everyone whose life you touch. You are the heart of this home, Adelaide. Never doubt that." Adelaide felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. She had come so far from that frightened girl who had shown up at the Hartley Ranch with nothing but a canvas bag and $3 to her name. She had built a life here, had found love here, had discovered her own worth here. "I love you," she told Daniel, "more than I have words to express." "I love you too," Daniel replied, "and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget how much you matter." 3 weeks later, on a warm June morning, Adelaide went into labor. Margaret sent one of the ranch hands racing into town to fetch the doctor while she stayed with Adelaide, helping her through the contractions. Daniel paced the downstairs hallway like a caged animal, torn between wanting to be with Adelaide and not wanting to be in the way. The labor lasted through most of the day and into the evening. Dr. Morrison arrived and took charge, his calm presence helping Adelaide focus through the pain. Margaret held her hand and wiped her forehead with cool cloths, offering encouragement and support. And when Adelaide felt like she could not go on, when the pain seemed too much to bear, she thought about Daniel waiting downstairs, about the child she was bringing into the world, about the family she had built against all odds. Finally, as the sun was setting outside the window, Adelaide gave one last tremendous push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world: her baby crying. Dr. Morrison held up a squirming, red-faced infant and announced, "It is a boy, a healthy, strong boy." Adelaide was crying and laughing at the same time as the doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in her arms. She looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect features and his shock of dark hair, so like Daniel's, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Go get Daniel," she told Margaret, unable to take her eyes off the baby. Moments later, Daniel burst into the room, his face pale with worry that transformed into wonder when he saw Adelaide holding their child. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the baby. "Adelaide, he is perfect," Daniel breathed. "Absolutely perfect." "We made him," Adelaide said, still marveling at the reality of it. "This is our son." "James," Daniel said softly, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. James immediately gripped Daniel's finger, and Daniel let out a choked laugh. "Hello, James. I am your father, and I promise I am going to do everything in my power to give you a good life." Adelaide watched her husband cradle their newborn son and felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. This was her family. This was her home. This was the life she had built from nothing but determination and hope. The weeks after James's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Adelaide was exhausted in a way she had never experienced before, but she was also happier than she had ever been. Daniel was a devoted father, taking over as much of the nighttime care as he could so Adelaide could rest. Margaret was an invaluable help, showing Adelaide how to nurse the baby, how to soothe him when he cried, how to navigate all the challenges of new motherhood. As summer turned to fall and James grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling baby, Adelaide often reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about her stepfather sometimes, wondered if he knew she had married, if he knew she had a child, if he ever regretted the cruel words he had spoken. But mostly she thought about Daniel's words on the porch the night he had proposed. "You already mean everything to me, right now today." Those words had changed her life. They had shown her that her worth was not dependent on accomplishments or achievements or proving herself to people who would never value her anyway. She had worth simply by existing, simply by being herself. Daniel had seen that worth when she could not, and he had loved her not despite her perceived flaws, but including them. One crisp October afternoon, Adelaide was sitting in the rocking chair in the nursery, nursing James, while sunlight streamed through the window. She heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Daniel in the doorway, watching her with that expression of absolute adoration that still made her heart flutter. "May I interrupt?" he asked softly. "Always," Adelaide replied. Daniel came and sat on the floor beside the rocking chair, leaning his head against Adelaide's knee. "I was just thinking about something." "What were you thinking about?" "About the day you arrived here, over a year ago now. You were so frightened and trying so hard not to show it. And I remember thinking that there was something special about you, something that drew me in. I did not know then that you would become my whole world." Adelaide reached down and ran her fingers through Daniel's hair, a gesture that had become familiar and comforting to both of them. "I was terrified that day, terrified you would turn me away, terrified I would fail at yet another thing. Instead, you succeeded at everything," Daniel said, looking up at her. "You became an integral part of our family. You became the woman I fell in love with. You became my wife and the mother of my child. Adelaide, oh, you are the strongest person I have ever known." "I am only strong because you gave me a safe place to be strong," Adelaide said. "Before I came here, I was surviving, but I was not living. You taught me the difference." James had finished nursing and was now drowsing in Adelaide's arms, his tiny fist pressed against his mouth. Daniel stood and gently took the baby, cradling him against his shoulder and patting his back until James let out a satisfying burp. Adelaide watched them, her two men, and felt tears prick at her eyes. "Why are you crying?" Daniel asked, concerned. "Because I am happy," Adelaide said simply. "Because I have you and James and Margaret and this life that I never dared to dream was possible. Because I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Daniel leaned down and kissed her gently, careful not to disturb the baby sleeping on his shoulder. "You are exactly where you belong. Always." The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a bright, energetic toddler with his father's blue-green eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Adelaide became pregnant again when James was 2 years old, and this time she delivered a daughter they named Rose Margaret, just as Adelaide had once hoped. Rose had her father's dark hair, but Adelaide's hazel eyes, and from birth she was sweet-natured and calm, where James was boisterous and active. Adelaide continued to run the household with Margaret's help, though they eventually did hire additional help, so Adelaide could focus more on the children. Daniel expanded the ranch, purchasing additional land and increasing their herd. The business thrived under his management, and the Hartley name became synonymous with quality cattle throughout the region. But more than the material success, it was the quality of their life together that mattered most to Adelaide. Every evening after the children were in bed, she and Daniel would sit on the porch swing and talk about their day, sharing the small victories and challenges that made up a life. Every Sunday, the family would attend church in town together, and afterward, they would have dinner at the ranch with whatever friends or ranch hands wanted to join them. Every night, Adelaide would tuck her children into bed and tell them how much they were loved, how valuable they were, how they could be anything they wanted to be. One spring evening, when James was 5 and Rose was 3, Adelaide stood in the kitchen preparing supper, while the children played on the floor with wooden blocks Daniel had carved for them. She paused in her work to watch them, marveling as she always did at these two little people she and Daniel had created. James was explaining some elaborate game to Rose, who was listening with the serious concentration she brought to everything. They were healthy and happy and secure, growing up knowing they were loved unconditionally. Daniel came in from the barn, dirty from a day's work, and immediately knelt down to greet the children. They swarmed him with delighted shrieks, not caring about the dust on his clothes. He hugged them both tightly, then stood and came to Adelaide, pulling her into his arms despite her protests about him being dirty. "I do not care," he said, kissing her soundly. "I have not seen my beautiful wife all day, and I need a proper greeting." Adelaide laughed and returned the kiss, then pushed him toward the stairs. "Go wash up. Supper will be ready in 15 minutes. As Daniel headed upstairs and Adelaide returned to her cooking, Margaret came into the kitchen and stood beside her, looking out at the children playing. "You have built a beautiful life here, Adelaide," the older woman said quietly. "I am so proud of you." "I could not have done any of it without you and Daniel," Adelaide replied. "You both gave me the chance I needed." "We gave you an opportunity," Margaret corrected. "But you did the hard work of building a life from it. Never sell yourself short, my dear." That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Adelaide and Daniel lay in bed talking as they often did. Adelaide's head was resting on Daniel's chest, and his fingers were tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "Daniel, can I tell you something?" Adelaide asked. "Always. Sometimes I still think about what my stepfather said, about never amounting to anything. And even though I know intellectually that he was wrong, that I have built a good life, sometimes those old voices creep back in." Daniel's hand stilled on her arm, and he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "I think that is natural, Adelaide. Years of being told something leaves scars, and scars take time to fade. But I want you to know that every time those voices come back, you can tell me, and I will remind you of the truth." "What is the truth?" Adelaide asked, even though she knew the answer. "The truth is that you are extraordinary. You are a devoted mother, a loving wife, a skilled manager of our household, and a valued member of our community. You are strong and kind and resilient. You survived terrible circumstances and built something beautiful from them. You are raising 2 children who will grow up secure in the knowledge that they are loved. You have transformed not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you." Daniel shifted so he could look into her eyes. "And most importantly, you already mean everything to me. Not because of what you do or what you accomplish, but because of who you are. That has not changed since the day I first told you. It will never change." Adelaide felt tears slide down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you so much, Daniel Hartley. And I love you, Adelaide Hartley. Forever." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and growth. James grew into a responsible young man who worked alongside his father on the ranch, learning the business from the ground up. Rose developed a love for horses and spent hours in the stables, eventually becoming one of the best riders in the county. Adelaide and Daniel added 2 more children to their family, another boy they named Thomas and a daughter named Catherine. Margaret lived to see all 4 of her grandchildren grow, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. Adelaide mourned her deeply, having long since come to think of Margaret as the mother she had lost. But she also felt grateful for the years they had together, for the wisdom and love Margaret had shared so freely. Through it all, Daniel remained Adelaide's rock, her partner in every sense of the word. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, difficult calving seasons and market downturns. They celebrated births and mourned losses. They argued occasionally, as all couples do, but they always came back together with love and understanding. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Daniel took Adelaide back to the pond where he had first told her he loved her. It was a warm September evening, much like the one 20 years earlier, and the cottonwood trees were just beginning to turn gold. They sat on a blanket by the water's edge, watching the sun set and painting the sky in brilliant colors. Adelaide leaned against Daniel's side, his arm around her shoulders, and felt the same sense of contentment she had felt that first time. "Do you ever regret it?" Adelaide asked suddenly. "Marrying me so quickly, taking a chance on someone with no references and a difficult past?" Daniel turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "Adelaide, I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. You are the best decision I ever made. These 20 years with you have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," Adelaide said softly. "You know, I used to think that my stepfather's words defined me, that I would never escape the label of worthless that he had given me. But you showed me something different. What did I show you? That worth is not something someone else can give or take away. It is inherent, and that love is not about earning someone's approval through accomplishments or achievements. Real love accepts and values someone exactly as they are." Adelaide turned to face Daniel fully. "You loved me when I could not love myself. You saw value in me when I could not see it, and because of that, I learned to see it too." Daniel cupped her face in his hands, his touch as gentle now as it had been 2 decades ago. "Adelaide, you already meant everything to me that first day I told you I loved you, but somehow, impossibly, you mean even more to me now. Every day with you is a gift. Every moment we share is precious. I am the luckiest man alive." Adelaide kissed him, pouring 20 years of love and gratitude and partnership into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had set, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Let us go home," Adelaide said, taking Daniel's hand. "Our children are probably wondering where we disappeared to." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, their steps perfectly matched after years of walking side by side. As the ranch house came into view, lights glowing warmly in the windows and the sounds of their children's laughter drifting out into the evening air, Adelaide felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been told she would never amount to anything, but she had proven those cruel words wrong in every possible way. She had built a life full of love and purpose. She had raised children who would grow up knowing their worth. She had been a partner to a good man who valued and respected her. She had created a home where people felt safe and welcomed. And most importantly, she had learned that her worth was not dependent on someone else's assessment. She was valuable because she existed, because she tried her best, because she loved and was loved in return. Her stepfather had been wrong, so utterly, completely wrong. As Adelaide and Daniel climbed the porch steps and entered their home, immediately surrounded by their children, all talking over each other about their day, Adelaide caught Daniel's eye across the chaos. He smiled at her, that special smile reserved just for her, and mouthed the words, "I love you." Adelaide smiled back, her heart full to bursting, and mouthed the words in return. This was her life, this beautiful, chaotic, love-filled life. And she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here. Years later, when Adelaide was an old woman with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes, she would sit on that same porch swing and tell her grandchildren about the day she arrived at the Hartley Ranch with nothing but a canvas bag and a heart full of fear. She would tell them about their grandfather's kindness, about how he had looked at her and seen not what she lacked, but what she possessed. She would tell them about the day he proposed by the pond and the words he had spoken that changed everything. "You already mean everything to me right now today." Those words had been her salvation, her turning point, her proof that she was more than the cruel labels her stepfather had given her. And she wanted her grandchildren to understand that same truth, to carry it forward into their own lives. "Remember," she would tell them, holding their small hands in her weathered ones, "your worth is not something you have to earn. You already have it. You already matter. You already mean everything, right now, today, exactly as you are." And watching her grandchildren's faces light up with understanding, Adelaide would feel that same sense of peace and completion that had sustained her through all the years. She had not just survived the cruelty of her early life. She had thrived despite it. She had built something beautiful and lasting. She had proven, beyond any shadow of doubt, that she amounted to everything. The end.